All right, so yeah, thanks everybody for convening with the CDD today for our fourth and final stakeholder convening. Go to the next slide, please. So our agenda for today is in front of you, and if you would, it would be great if, since we've all been in these meetings together, put your name and organization or role, whatever you think works best, in the chat for others to see who's here today. You all know me. I think I'm Amy Bolger from the Child Development Division.
Hi, Amy. Just a reminder that those of us who are out of state government don't have access to the chat, but we'll wave.
Oh, I didn't realize that. People were putting... Okay.
It's not outside of state government, though Beth is right. It's people who don't have the app installed.
I see. So. Okay, because there were definitely folks in last night's meeting who were putting their names in the chat. So, so given that some of you don't have the app installed, why don't we just do a quick round of introductions? I'm Amy Bolger from the Child Development Division. Joanna? Oh, Joanna, you're on mute.
Sorry, Joanna Vasey from the Child Development Division as well, working on all things related to STARS.
Okay, I'm just going to go through folks' names as I see on my screen. Becky?
It's always the figure out how to unmute. So I'm Becky Millard. I'm the Director of Northern Lights at CCV.
Great. Maggie? Maggie, you're on mute. Ray, how about you? Do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Ray Garofano, I'm the Child Care Quality Program Administrator.
You? How about Deb?
Deb Gass. I'm the Director of Early Education Services in Windham County. We're the Head Start program and a Parent-Child Center.
Thank you. Beth?
I'm not sure which Beth you're after, so I'll go Beth Traver.
Oh, sorry.
Beth Traver is the Executive Director at Oak Hill Children's Center in Penn.
That's right. I see way down at the bottom of my list.
And I can follow.
Beth Trzanski.
Beth Trzanski with Building Bright Futures. Thanks.
Thank you. Nicole?
Hi, Nicole Dubuque, Policy Director for the Child Development Division.
Ellen?
I'm Ellen Kraft. I'm a licensed home provider with Honeycomb Kids in Richmond.
Thank you. Janet?
Hi there, Janet McLaughlin, Executive Director of the Vermont Association for the Education of Young Children.
And Lori?
Lori Metcalf, Executive Director, Northshire Day School in Manchester Center, Vermont.
Thank you. Luann?
Hi there, Luann Beninati from Let's Grow Kids.
And Lynn?
Hi, Lynn Robbins, Early Childhood and After School Systems Specialist at the Child Development Division.
Trisha?
Hi, everyone. Tricia Pollock, Senior Associate for Program Quality at Vermont After School. Sorry I'm not on the screen. I am driving today, but I am obviously on the call. Thank you.
Be careful. Trisha? Oh, sorry, not Trisha. Tanya?
Hi, Tanya Kangas, CIS Childcare Coordinator at Winston Patty Center down in Brattleboro.
Great. Did I miss anybody? Not. Okay. All right. So today the task before us. Oh, I'm sorry. Did I miss somebody? Oh, I thought I heard a voice. Today the task before us is to talk through the elements and of STARS criteria. We have made modifications based on input from you as stakeholders and some other things. And so we wanted to go through that, those STARS criteria with you, and just kind of look at the system as a whole, the STARS level of progression across the system. And we have one brief slide on the promulgation process, which will be the next step for the CDD. And then we want to talk with you about next steps for everyone, which would include a focus on the first year with the revised system in place. So next slide, please. Actually, Ray, I think this is, you had some information you wanted to relay too.
Yeah, thank you, Amy. So before we jump into the work that Amy and Joanna will be kind of taking you on this journey of where we've landed with the STARS revision process, I wanted to just say a few words, talk about our process, and really, first and foremost, relay deep appreciation and gratitude for your work, all the stakeholders in working through this with us for the past several months and providing really invaluable feedback to our process. As you saw in the documents that you received earlier this week, what we landed with as far as a new STAR system is different than what you saw back in July, before we had the break in our stakeholder feedback. And the reason for that is because we heard you. We heard our partners. We heard your feedback that the system was still too complicated and didn't focus on child outcomes. So we went back and made some drastic changes, worked with our federal TA and other partners or other state partners to really focus on child outcomes and simplification of the system, to remove any burdensome administrative tasks that would hinder your participation in the STAR system. I also wanted to thank the team, the CDD team that has been working on this revision tirelessly for the last several months, really, revising and crafting and redrafting various versions to get closer to where we landed. So we hope that this meets your needs. We feel that we've landed in a really good place to focus on child outcomes and making sure that the CQI plan is the backbone of the system and that the levels do build on each other. And then the last thing I wanted to mention before we jump in is that we want to acknowledge that this is progress and not perfection. We are at a point where we, to meet the timelines for the promulgation process, which Amy will go through in a little bit with you, we need to deliver something and wrap up the revisions. So we're at a place where we feel really good about the new system, and we are looking at this as a phased approach, and this being phase one. And we're committed to having a CQI plan for the STAR system itself to make sure that we are holding ourselves accountable to catching up with best practice and the latest research and evidence. So with that, if there's no questions or comments, I will hand it over to Amy and Joanna to walk you through today's presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Ray. Okay, Maggie, next slide, please. So can everyone see this slide? No. I can advance the slides myself. Yeah, you can see now. Okay. So before you have a slide, elements for revised criteria. I want to give you a couple minutes to read through this, but essentially, as Ray said, we took into account your feedback from our stakeholders. And then in consultation with and review of research sources and research from the Build Initiative, from Child Trends, from Equality Center, etc., we essentially focused on what you see here. So promoting child's well-being, learning, and development, supporting a program's continuous quality improvement. So the new system will have that backbone of CQI. And then we wanted, and what we have striven to produce is a system that has the following characteristics: that the criteria will work across all settings while accounting for differences in program type, that the language will be clear to programs and families, that we would have a simpler and less burdensome system to implement, etc. So before we go to the next slide and I turn it over to Joanna, any questions about anything on this slide? Okay, you're on, Joanna. Next slide, and you need to come off mute.
All right, now I think I can speak to everyone. There we go. So based on stakeholder feedback review, we did basically a pruning, if you will, of the criteria in the STAR system. We took out anything that wasn't directly related to positive outcomes for children based on the current research and knowledge in the field. Child outcomes are mostly influenced by adult-child interactions, and so things that weren't directly related to that were removed from the system. What did we take out? We took out business practices, we took out health, we took out leadership, and we also took out learning environments. And we tried to, the idea behind that was to focus efforts in the QRIS on things that were specifically related to positive child outcomes and that were evidence-based. And we also, for simplicity's sake, reviewed the block and point system that we had originally planned on using and determined that that was actually pretty complicated and not very transparent. And so we changed block 5 from being a points-based system where programs would select which criteria to meet and changed it into a block that builds directly on level 4. And we also we also streamlined the block system so that each block has evidence in it that's directly related to the block previous, and there aren't any gaps at the levels in the criteria that programs are going to meet, as there had been in the previous version. And if the other thing to note about things that were done in the system related to stakeholder review, as Ray mentioned, a CQI plan is going to be one of the foundation of this whole system. And programs, there will be criteria that will be required for the CQI plan, but the CQI plan is also something programs develop for themselves, and any of those criterion that are no longer used in the STAR system can still be used in a program CQI plan. For example, if a program wanted to improve on business practices, that could go in their plan and they could still focus on that aspect. Any questions about this slide? Okay, I think we can move to the next one then. The STARS level progression. So the way the levels are going to progress is that, sorry, just pulling my notes up here. So level 1, as has always been, is compliance with regulations. And then level 2 is is considered a self-study process where programs prepare for improvements that will be undertaken in the subsequent levels. So activities that will be done at level 2 would be things like ensuring staff receive trainings that'll provide the necessary information about child development and learning about program assessment tools, what they measure and why those measures are important for children and teachers, preparing for consultations by a STARS coach or assessor, learning to collect information about child interests and needs and using this information for planning curriculum and activities, using self-assessment tools to establish a baseline from which to grow, and also to establish a CQI plan with goals generated from new learning and self-assessment, in which will support the program to move toward the next level, which is level 3. And level 3 is about early implementation of improvement goals. So in level 3, programs are observed by an outside observer and use the feedback to change practices, implement developmentally appropriate teaching practices that were learned about in level 2, develop and implement curriculum based on observed child needs and preferences, implement activities to engage families and youth, and the level 2 CQI plan is reviewed and updated with goals generated from observation and consultation, which set the program up to achieve level 4. Level 4 is improving on implementation of level 3 and will involve, again, outside observations. Only at level 4, there'll be a scoring threshold that'll come into play. And program continues to demonstrate that they increasingly gather information about children in the program beyond the basics of child needs and interests, to include consideration of developmental levels, children's first language, and a family culture. And the CQI plan again is updated and goals are reviewed. And then level 5 is the further implementation of program, refining program implementation of improvement strategies. And the program at this point demonstrates proficiency in all the content areas. The program is observed and achieves a high scoring based on the criterion of the assessment tool. The program involves families and youth in the leadership of the program, and the CQI plan is reviewed, and most of the elements of the CQI plan are about maintaining proficiency in the high quality practices. Any questions about this slide?
I have a question. This is Tricia. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I just want to follow up, Joanna, about the use of the word scoring, because as I've discussed with you, for the PQA, we do not score it like with numbers. You know, it's not. So we consider using the word high results.
Yes.
I just don't want to. Yeah, I want to just make that clear so it isn't confusing to the after school folks who aren't used to, using scores. Just throwing that out there.
Sure. And in the actual, soon we get to the slides about the actual elements of quality, the word result is used. So
great. Okay.
I'm
Thank you
sorry.
so much.
I put note scoring in my notes. So
that's okay.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure we're on the same page. Thank you.
Yep. You're welcome. Any other questions about those star levels? Okay, so we're ready for the next slide. So based on all the information background information that we provided, we narrowed our STARS elements of quality down to 3. One is adult-child interactions, in which the focus is on the importance of adult-child interactions as foundational for positive child outcomes. Family and youth engagement. The program engages families and youth and supports them according to their needs and preferences. Program structures and practices are responsive to the cultural norms of families and youth. And finally, responsive practice, which is when the program implements a culturally, developmentally, linguistically, and individually responsive curriculum that promotes all areas of child development and is informed by family and youth voice. Each one of these levels was inspired and informed by known best practice, both nationally and within our Vermont early childhood and after school systems. And the inspiration for adult-child interactions came directly from, as we've mentioned before, research and information about what has the greatest impact in early childhood programs and after school programs for children and youth, and that is, again, adult-child interactions. And those will be measured by the use of formal assessment tools, as you'll see going forward when we get into the criteria and the elements of quality descriptions a little bit more deeply. Family and youth engagement was inspired by the Strengthening Families framework that came from the Center for the Study of Social Policy, as well as Youth Thrive, and which is also an initiative of the Center for the Study of Social Policy, and also from the Pyramid for Program Quality that was developed by the Weichert Center. And lastly, the responsive practice element was inspired by mainly by Vermont's guiding principles, and also by the importance of use of child observation to get information about children's needs and interest, and how effective that is in developing appropriate developmentally appropriate curriculum, and also was inspired by the Vermont Early Learning Standards, or the VELS. Any questions about the elements of quality that were chosen? Okay. If no one has any questions, we'll jump into the adult-child interactions quality elements. So, as you can see, this quality element is in every level of the STAR system 2, 3, 4, and 5. and there isn't a lot of variation. There's not any, I'm sorry, I'm misspeaking. And at each level, it builds on the activities and processes from the level before. So at level 2, the program engages in a self-study process to become familiar with state-approved assessment tools. And the program develops a CQI plan that utilizes information from the self-study. And I should clarify that everything in this particular element is based on program assessment tools that look at adult-child interactions in the program. And those tools are likely to be the class and the teapot or the tippy toes, which is the infant toddler version of the teapot. And that is going to be the main driver of this entire quality element. At level 3, as I mentioned before, the program staff receive an observation and consultation by a state-approved observer using a state-approved assessment tool. The program plans and implements strategies to improve teacher-child interaction based on the consultation feedback, and the strategies are integrated in the CQI plan. So at level 4, the program receives an observation of each classroom or group by a state-approved observer using a state-approved assessment tool, and the program achieves results in the middle range as defined by the authors of the assessment tool. And the reason that this calls out having each classroom be observed is that research has found that there's often more variation in quality practices between classrooms in a program than there is from program to program. And so we felt it was really important to have programs receive feedback about the quality practices in each one of their classrooms so they can improve their program overall, not just in classrooms. If we selected a certain percentage of classrooms that would be observed. And again, the CQI plan addresses areas for improvement based on the observation scores. And then level 5 is the more refined implementation of high quality teacher or adult-child interactions. And in that, the program receives an observation of each classroom or group by a state-approved observer using a state-approved tool, and achieves results in the high range as defined by the authors of the assessment tool. And again, as I mentioned before, the CQI plan includes goals and strategies for maintaining highly effective adult-child interactions or meets the standards for national accreditation or Head Start. And actually, the meets the standards for national accreditation or Head Start is part of the criterion above. It's part of either the program meets standards for national accreditation or Head Start, or receives an observation with a high result, in the high range. Any questions about?
Janet has her hand up.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. I just was curious about, I guess I was wondering if you guys considered whether or not for level 4 to just have an observation of each classroom being, and not necessarily having a results cutoff. Is, you know, like, so the move, I guess it feels like the jump right between 3 and 4 there is really significant. And I just was curious about whether or not it's just having it in each classroom without having results cutoff was an option that you guys considered.
No, it wasn't. And the it wasn't. If I were to, what I think, just based on what that comment, and of course my word's not the last word, but if I were to change anything, it would be that all the classrooms would receive that observation and consultation at level 3, rather than moving the mid-range result from level 4.
Okay, thank you. Just trying to make sure I understand how you guys are, how you're thinking about it.
Yeah.
I
Just
see.
in our experience so far in the STAR system with program assessments, that observation and consultation is really integral piece of programs learning how to, what's important about the tool and how to use the feedback that it provides for improvement. And so, I mean, to me, that's the really, and then, you know, the effectiveness of that process is then shown when there is another observation and the program and the elements of that, what's in the assessment tool are actually scored.
Joanna, we have a couple other people with their hands up.
Do you want to call on them, Amy? Because I have my notes up, so I can't see the screen.
Yeah.
So that'd be great.
Beth and Ellen. So Beth, I'm not sure who came first, but Beth, go ahead with your question.
Thanks. Just super quick note. Just in the portion where in level 5 with national accreditation or Head Start, I think it would be helpful to include Head Start / Early Head Start, because they're a little bit different, but you know, they have the same
Good point.
strict criteria. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for that. And Ellen.
There we go. Hi, I was just wondering if you could say a few words about how you envision it, some of these rolling out in a truly mixed age setting where you have like infants through age 6 in one group.
So we have used the class in settings like that, and I imagine we'll probably have a similar strategy, which is that, and I can't really speak about the teapot or tippy toes because I don't know that they are being used in licensed home settings, but what we've typically done with the class is either provided a separate observation for each age group, or we have determined that the largest percentage of age. So let's say a program had 1 infant and 4 preschoolers, then the class observation would be provided for the preschoolers. So, I mean, that's a detail that we probably would want to think about some more before we made a definite procedural decision about it. And also Teachstone, that's developed the class, has new information about the types of programs that it could get used in. So, they may have some more guidance to offer us than they have in the past as well, once we get into more implementation of that process.
Nice, thank you. And I also had another question too. Were you envisioning these assessments to be like random, or can they be scheduled?
Oh no, they'd be scheduled.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, they wouldn't be random. That would sort of defeat the whole purpose of the intentionality of it, to just have somebody pop into your program. And the other piece about that is that one of the things we learned early on in this whole process of having program assessment is that if a program that basically people fall into their habits and patterns that they're very used to in how they interact with children pretty early on in the observation process. And so there's no need to really surprise people to find out if they, are really doing the practices consistently or not. Any other questions? Okay, I think we can move on then to family and youth engagement quality elements. So we mentioned earlier that one of the inspirations for the family and youth engagement element is the pyramid of program quality that's developed by the Weichert Center. The pyramid includes, among other things, emotional safety, active engagement and skill building, belonging, choice, responsibility, and leadership for school-age children and youth. And our other inspiration for this element of quality was the Strengthening Families framework developed by the Center for the Study of Social Policy that helps programs ensure their practices are responsive to families and family members, regardless of race, culture, home language, family composition, and sexual orientation or an identity, and partner effectively and respectively with parents. So level 2, in this quality element, in the self-study, preparation for implementation is the program self-assesses its family and youth engagement practices using a state-approved tool. And the program incorporates information from the self-assessment into their CQI plan. That's pretty straightforward. And then at level 3, the program engages families and youth and considers their needs and preferences. And the CQI plan addresses program structures and policies that are responsive to the cultural norms of family and youth. At level 4, the program provides supports to strengthen families and engages youth voice according to needs and preferences. The program's structures and practices are responsive to families and youth's cultural norms. So we've moved from intending to be responsive to actually having and putting in place culturally responsive practices and structures. And then the program adapts their responsive structures and practices and includes information about improved practices in the CQI plan. And lastly, at level 5, the program provides supports to strengthen families and engages youth voice according to needs and preferences, is responsive to cultural norms, and engages families and youth in program leadership, or meets the standards for national accreditation or Head Start. And early Head Start. And the program includes goals to engage family or youth leaders in the CQI plan. Any questions about that quality element? And Amy, if you have people raise their hands, would you?
Yes, I don't see anybody.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, I do see somebody now, though.
Okay.
Sorry, this is.
So Janet.
Thank you, Amy. Sorry. Yeah. I couldn't find my hand for a second. Can you tell me if you're going to get to this later? You talked about class as the tool, as the documentation, right? For that, for the last one. What is what's the tool to be used, or what's the documentation needed for as you're getting to sort of levels 4 and 5 here, and how as you distinguish between those two?
So in the family and youth engagement quality element, the tool is the Strengthening Families self-assessment tool, or the Youth Thrive tool that has that are both been developed by the Center for the Study of Social Policy. As well as there are elements of youth voice and youth engagement and leadership in the program quality assessment tools that were developed by the Weichert Center, and There's more information. If you go to the Weichert Center website, there's a really lot of information about youth voice in that can expand a little more on that for you.
Okay, thank you. I just want to make sure, like the other one just is so like clear cut of how it will be done, about how the documentation is. I want to make sure I understand this.
Right. Well, the Youth Thrive and the Strengthening Family Self-Assessment don't really necessarily provide scores or rate programs. They really just provide feedback about how well the program's doing and inform the program making a plan to improve their practices that strengthen family resilience and protective factors in families. So that's why there's no language in this element about meeting certain thresholds of the assessment tool. They don't actually really work that way. Any other questions? Or
Janet, do you still have your hand up, or did we answer your question?
Yes, you answered it. I still can't find my hand. It'll take me just a second. I'll get it down.
Sorry.
The elusive lower hand button.
Just wanted to make sure.
And Janet, before I move to the next slide, I will say that the next slide also doesn't have clear-cut thresholds like there is in the adult-child interactions quality element for a similar reason, because there's not really a scoring mechanism for any of the supporting frameworks that exist. And so just a little before we get to it, so you'll know that to expect that too. And if there are no more questions about family and youth engagement, I'll move to the next quality element. Okay. So this is the responsive practice quality element. This one is a lot packed into it, but essentially it is about using developmentally appropriate practice and being responsive to all the varying influences that are brought to bear on children and youth that are participating in our programs. And this was, as I said before, inspired by the Vermont guiding principles, and the progression through the levels is increasing understanding in how children learn, understanding factors that influence children's growth and learning outside of the program, as I mentioned, and individualizing that knowledge to each and every child to best serve their needs. And another thing to note is that's particularly, it's for all the quality elements, but it's very particular to this one, is that documents that are generated in the work as you move through the levels will be what will be used as verification that the criterion have been met. There's not an expectation that there'll be additional documents beyond showing the child observations and showing how those observations got used to create, develop and implement curricula. So to talk about level 2, this is the self-study and preparation. This is mostly about making sure all the staff are on a good footing with the information they need to know about before they start implementing the practices. And that includes developmentally appropriate practice, learning standards relevant to the ages served, and the learning standards that we use are the Vermont Early Learning Standards, and I'm still trying to determine what those would be for after school. And child observation and documentation techniques. And also one of the things I had thought that is not called out here, but it would be in more specific in guidance, would be that program staff would have training in the core knowledge areas 1 through 5, that they're all related to what happens in this particular quality element. And the CQI plan incorporates strategies and a timeline for program staff to receive the trainings and practice a new knowledge. Or the old knowledge if they already have received coursework or training and this level. Then at level 3, the program uses child observation to develop and implement curricula that consider the interests and needs of each and every child, are developmentally appropriate and align with state-approved learning standards. And the CQI plan addresses goals for implementation of developmentally appropriate practice, alignment with early learning standards, and responsive practice. And then level 4, the program uses state-approved child assessment tools to develop and implement curricula that are culturally, linguistically, developmentally, and individually responsive and meet the needs of each and every child. With the exception of after-school programs, the program implements developmental screening using a state-approved tool and involves families in the screening process. And the CQI plan addresses steps to prepare for considering family or youth voice. And then level 5 is the refined implementation of the practices from level 4. The program uses state-approved child assessment tools to develop and implement curricula that are culturally, linguistically, developmentally, and individually responsive and meet the needs of each and every child and consider family and youth voice or meet the standards for national accreditation or Head Start. And the CQI plan addresses strategies for maintaining high levels of responsible and equitable practices. Any questions about this slide?
Becky has a question.
I knew you would.
Of course I do. Yeah, no, so this is exciting. I think there's a lot of really cool things here. I did want to just sort of note one thing. It sounds like the framing here is really focused around learning standards. At one point you did reference core knowledge and competencies, which is terminology we use for professional standards. So like the things the educator needs to know and do versus learning standards, which are the things we want kids to learn. Right. So I don't know if that was intentional, and if so, I mean, I can support some of the backup documentation based on what we've got in place in Vermont and in whatever ways are helpful for you all. But I just wanted to identify that because those are really different sets of standards that do really different things. And I wasn't sure if you meant to reference both.
Well, I did. And thank you for making that distinction for folks, because in order to have a high level quality of responsive practice and curriculum development, teachers, adults, people planning, teachers would need to know, but would need to know about the Vermont Early Learning Standards, and also would need to be, would need to
I can see
meet
the
the criteria that are the
sure.
core knowledge areas.
Yeah,
Does
I
that
can see
make
the
sense?
relevance. I can see the relevance of both for sure. A lot of people mix them up, so I would just sort of encourage, as you're detailing any of these pieces out, just to be really specific about differentiating between the types of standards. And the Vermont Early Learning Standards, I see Trisha's hand, Vermont Early Learning Standards do go up to grade 3. So they are relevant in a lot of our settings, including some of our after school settings and some of our mixed age settings. But of course, as you highlighted in your presentation, they don't necessarily capture all of the after school.
Yeah, because, and, this is how we're in our thinking about how this, especially the self-study level, would play out for programs. We'll have to be we'll be having, conversations with Northern Lights at CCV and the Child Development Division about how how programs would demonstrate that the staff people had met these criteria and what coursework would count and what degrees would count and things like, all those details that are going to be important to people have not been developed to a level of specificity at this point, but they will be.
Tricia.
Hello. First, I just, it's so weird being on the phone. What was I going to say? I was going to make the exact same point as Becky did about the distinction between the knowledge areas being for professionals and just making that distinction. But the other question I had was, so you keep making reference to the fact that there has to be something in the CQI or the PIP, the plan. But what if that is not an area that a program feels they need to work in? Is it a requirement that they have something in the plan? What if that's not like the results of their self-assessment?
So we
do you follow what I'm saying?
So it would be required that the plan would adjust the goal. Whether if the program's already met the goal, then they could describe that and show the data for that.
Well, I think, okay, well then that's a different thing though. So you're saying now you're asking people if they've met a goal to explain how they've met the goal. I mean, because the whole point of this is you're doing a self-assessment, right? If you don't, if your program doesn't need to work on that, then it just needs to be clear that if you don't, you're going to still have to back up why you don't need to meet it, because there will be programs that this may not be an area of improvement for them, but if the way it's written, it sounds like they have to have a goal. I just throwing that out there.
Well, for each one of the quality elements, the program will have to demonstrate they've met it. And the CQI plan is foundational to the whole process. So it's necessarily going to mention whether or not they met the quality element, because that's what we're trying to do here. If you know what I'm saying.
Right.
If they've already met it, then they have documentation for that, and that will be fine. And the plan will.
So their evidence. Okay, so their evidence will show that they met it, so it doesn't necessarily have to be in their CQI plan. Am I getting too detailed? I don't know.
Well, yeah, and I'm just trying to think through the scenario that you're talking about, and I think that.
Yeah. So there's always room for improvement, but I'm just saying, okay. I think you've. I don't
think
know.
they would have to demonstrate they had met it, and their CQI plan would have. They would need to say so in their CQI plan and have a reason why they're not addressing the goal in their CQI plan.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Beth. Trevor.
Thanks. I just, I'm looking for a little clarity around that staff training or qualifications piece. It was in the original version, it was very clear cut. You had to have, your years of experience, your training hours, your qualifications, etc. And I'm seeing, this piece about in level 2, that staff are receiving training, blah, blah, blah. I'm not seeing it carrying through with the rest of the levels. I'm kind of wondering where those pieces fall and what the evidence would look like, or the documentation for those pieces. What weight do those have at this point? I know that in the previous, STARS applications, that was, you know, across programs that all the programs I've ever talked to, like no one has a full staff of bachelor's degree people and who've been there for 10 years. And, you know, so it's a hard area to get all of those points in. I'm wondering if there's a shift in philosophy with this system or, you know, this new STARS system, or, you know, just how all that fits into the new revision.
So it is not anywhere near as heavily weighted, and I would say that it's very minimally weighted in this system. It's only at the self-study level, and so that's level 2. And the reason that things like years of experience and annual, you know, how much annual training a person has and what degrees they have are not in here is because that wasn't there are studies, you know, there's information available about how weighting that in a QRIS is not equitable for programs, because not all, you know, as we all know what the challenges are for hiring qualified people, and what the resources are for workforce development, et cetera, for lots of different levels. Putting, you know, putting some of those requirements in place would really be a barrier for programs. And what is in the self-study is to provide, to ensure, I guess, that all programs, you know, start off in the same place as they're moving through the quality elements. And the other thing that I would say about this is there's some more specificity to this. For example, that hasn't been determined yet, but for example, how many, you know, we probably aren't going to say that every single person on the staff has to have, you know, taken all the VALS modules, or, you know, et cetera, but there would be a certain number of people, or the person responsible for planning, and then people who had acquired certain degrees, and this is kind of where the core knowledge areas would come into play, in terms of what we'd be looking at for what trainings would be counted, et cetera, for this arena. All of that stuff is yet to be fleshed out, but every attempt will be made to make it be equitable and fair for programs and achievable.
Great, thanks.
Ellen.
Okay, sorry, I couldn't find the mute button there. So I was also, thanks for clarifying too about the continuing ed piece there. So I did have a question about that as well. But I also, in level 4, I was noticing that it talks about using state-approved assessment tools. And you had mentioned earlier, you know, class, teapot, tippy toes and stuff like that. Would this be more like a TSG for child assessment type of thing? Yes. And then what were you thinking for the developmental screenings?
So that would be the ASQ. The ASQ, what is it? ASQ SE. SE. Yeah.
Okay.
If it was determined that was necessary.
Okay. Thanks.
I don't see any other hands up.
Okay. So then I'm going to pass it to you, Amy, to talk about the promulgation process.
Great, thank you. So as we mentioned earlier, the next step for all of us will be to bring a product, initiate the promulgation or rulemaking process, and that begins with bringing a product to for internal review, meaning within the state, within the Child Development Division, reviewed by leadership and our legal folks. And then essentially these administrative rules are really, any administrative rules really in Vermont are adopted through a series of steps that include filings and hearings and reviews. And, you know, most of you, if not all of you, are familiar with this process from licensing regulations. But essentially you see here the pathway for those filings, hearings, and reviews. So you see pre-filing with the Interagency Committee on Administrative Rules. And then once it passes through that body, it goes to the Secretary of State, who has a bunch of steps that they would go through to determine if it should move forward. And one of the steps that the Secretary of State does is put out notices related to the rule in question, and we are committed, obviously, to having that public hearing. It's interesting because actually you don't have to have a public hearing, but it's always recommended, and we pretty much always do it, particularly with something like this that could be, you know, contentious and people might have really strong feelings about. So there is a hearing and comment period that's, you know, scripted out. Then it goes back. Once it's finalized, it goes back to the Secretary of State after the CDD has had a chance to see what comes out of that public hearing and make any modifications that we want to make. From there, it goes to the Legislative Committee on Administrative Rules, and that's an 8-person committee that, you know, legislators from the General Assembly, they take a look, they can approve it, they can modify it, they can object to it, they can do nothing at all. And if it passes through LCAR, then it goes through filing, you know, it becomes adopted through a filing with the Secretary of State again. So what I would say about this is we thought it was important to include this slide, not because it's really exciting or anything you'll probably have on your bedside table, but because I always wondered, I will say, when I was a child kid, why does stuff take so long? You know, and this is really like a 6 to 8 month kind of at a minimum 6 months, 8 months, at least for the most part, sometimes longer. It's a long process with a lot of steps. Any questions about this piece? Joanna, you're back up.
Just let me unmute. Okay, so for those of you that are wondering about what's going to happen in the first year of the revised system, for one thing, the hoped for timeline for that first year is going to be July 1, 2023 through July 1, 2024, if everything goes according to plan. So that year of STAR was the first year of the revised system will be a hold harmless year. So in other words, programs whose certificate expires during that first year will need to renew their STARS status by submitting a STARS portfolio. However, if they're not able to meet the criteria to maintain the same STAR level, their STAR level won't decrease during that first year. The STARS system will again resume monitoring STARS for all programs. And so if your program doesn't have a requirement to reapply to STARS during the hold harmless year, there still will be a requirement to send an annual report. And again, all programs will maintain their current star level. And they also will be able to submit a portfolio if they want to increase in star level. And the reason I say portfolio is that's a little bit of change from our application, but the way the new system will work is that programs will submit an online portfolio that is a collection of the work that they've done toward the quality elements over the course of the year, and documents pertaining to that will be uploaded into the portfolio for the reviewers to look at. The programs that don't have to submit a full application can begin work on their CQI plan during that year one of the revised system. And the other thing that is going to be in place is CQI that will live at the CDD that will be for the entire STARS system as well. So both of those things will be going on. If everything goes according to plan, there will be practice-based coaching that will be implemented during year one, where that programs will be able to access to work on their STARS portfolio or to get consultation on their developing their CQI plan. This will also be a test year for the system, where we'll be able to get information about how the system is working, and we'll be able to work out any bugs and be able to improve the processes and supports that'll be available to programs to work through the system. Any questions?
Thank you, Joanna.
Oh,
I see her.
Janet.
Janet. Hi, guys. Sorry again. I guess I'm going back more to the promulgation process, because I just, at the beginning of the meeting, I feel like there was a mention of the fact that of wanting to have, of figuring out how much detail do we really want in the promulgation to be in the, like, officially in that needs to be promulgation process, and how much, and so I'm just curious, how much of this system as it's currently designed are you thinking is in the promulgation process, and how much of it is going to be is going to be, I don't know, leave more flexibility or room for adaptation to the system overall over time?
I can answer that if anybody, unless someone wants to take that. So basically the language that's in the elements that we presented here is very broad and non-specific. And that the reason for that is so that when it goes through promulgation, we have flexibility to change and make improvements. For example, the assessment tools that we'll be using are not called out are not named, because if it goes through promulgation with a named, then we would have to do that process all over again. If another tool, if we came upon another tool that was a better tool for us to use in the system. And so that's sort of the main thinking about why it's so general and broad in these elements that we've named so far. And in our guidance and in our evidence, that's where all the specific tools that'll be named and all the specific thresholds will be spelled out much more clearly.
Okay, that's helpful. Yeah. So those documents you shared is the level of detail that would be in the promulgation process. Okay.
Yeah.
Essentially.
Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to share, because I don't know if it'd probably be helpful for this group to kind of think about this in layers, right? So there's statute, right, which we know is already set. We're not looking to change the statute around this. And then there's rules, which is where the promulgation process comes in. And so we'll be talking about kind of like what the program is and what the rules associated with that are. And then we'll continue to be talking to stakeholders beyond rules to talk about actual process and procedure for like scoring and how the tools will evolve through time and things like that. So yes, a lot of this will be part of promulgation, but we will also be engaging stakeholder feedback when we get down to like the procedural elements of the program as well.
And as Ray mentioned earlier, we're really committed to a process of continuous quality improvement for the system itself. So we intentionally left the language that we presented to you today broad, so that we can make changes and be more nimble than we have been able to be in the past.
Okay, I don't see any more questions, so I am going to hand off to Ray.
Yeah, thank you, Joanna.
For the wrap up.
I'm just going to wrap up. I think the team did a really good job of presenting where we've landed. And again, to hit our timelines to have a new system by the next fiscal year, state fiscal year, we do need to wrap up the changes. So in that effort, we are going to release a feedback collector tool tomorrow, or yeah, I believe it's tomorrow. Looking for general comments. You'll see it's different than previous collector tools that were very detailed, went level by level, criteria by criteria. This is more about generally what you've seen, and if there's general tweaks that you recommend, we certainly will look at them. But the framework of the system is where we've landed, and it's pretty final at this point. And again, we're really excited with where we ended up. We believe that this new system is really achieving the goals that we heard you asking for. And it's simplifying and meeting the needs of you. And hopefully, we really thought about the needs of the families and the kiddos involved. We look forward to your feedback in the next week. That collective tool will only be open for 1 week, and re-engaging with you as we develop the guidance manual and the process and procedures for the system. And, we still have a few minutes, so if there's any other thoughts or comments or feedback, this is a good time for those right now with all of us still in the room.
I have a comment. I just have an accolade. I think you've done an amazing job in transforming this document from where we were in July to what we're seeing today. And you really did listen to us. And I think this is a stellar end result, at least at this point in the game. So thank you.
Thank you so much for that feedback. And, I'll say personally, it's been, we've had our bumps in the road since this process started, especially given many of you in the room have, were part of the evolution process years ago and have been involved in trying to improve the STAR system in Vermont for many, many years. So, we wanted to be really intentional about making the changes as much as we could in our, that we're able to at this point to respond to the work. And, I can't thank you all enough for the feedback that you gave us to help us get to this place.
Yeah, I just want to second what Deb just shared. And it's clear that a lot of work has gone in, and appreciate kind of the receptivity to be able to lean back in and try and identify what the priorities are. So I think we are well on our way. I have faith that I actually think that it could be simplified even further. I remember our first meeting and people sharing kind of what the priorities were, what they hoped the STAR system would represent. And certainly the accessibility and the equity were priorities that I heard people sharing. So I think we are headed down the right path, and I hope we'll kind of consider how we can continue to identify those priorities of what do we really want to evaluate to be able to identify a quality rating system that we feel like works for our state.
Thanks, Beth.
I just want to say, given that I learned earlier that not everyone can see what's in the chat, we have a new comment in the chat from Luann. Thanks for all this hard and good progress on this. And from Jackie, thank you. I'm excited about the Strengthening Families tool. Yeah, thank you so much, all of you.
With that, we'll give you a few minutes back to your day. Thank you again for giving up some of your time and going on this journey with us.